The Giants are kind of flying under the radar, and for obviously coming off a disastrous season a year ago, Wink Martindale out as defensive coordinator. Obviously, the coaching staff, there were issues, concerns about Daboll and how he handles his staff, all the things that we've heard during the course of the offseason. Then you talk about the talent, right? Saquon Barkley leaving for the Philadelphia Eagles during the course of the offseason. Daniel Jones always loves to be, he is, the redheaded stepchild. He just is. Everybody loves to knock Daniel Jones, whether it be on TV, whether it be on radio, whether it be on podcasts, whether it be in news, whatever it might be. Daniel Jones is like the pinata of New York athletes. He just is. And I get it. I understand. He's getting paid a ton of money. He's the quarterback of the Giants. And, he's kind of the guy that what you want to see, he'll show you. If you don't believe he's particularly good, well, there's enough on tape to believe that. If you want to say, well, he's talented enough to go out there and play the position you could win, well, you go back a couple years ago when the Giants made the playoffs and won a playoff game in Minnesota. But there's a lot of layers to the Giants. And I'll tell you this, as I was, driving down my customary drive down the West Side Highway this morning. By the way, traffic was a bliss. It was fantastic. Labor Day weekend, people down at the beach. I won't be at the beach this weekend, but thank you for that. There was no traffic. It was fantastic. But as I was driving down the West Side Highway this morning, I was thinking about this. There is too much negativity when it comes to the Giants this year. It just is. And I get, we all lived through it. The end of the Jerry Reese era. We all lived through it. The Dave Gettleman era. We all lived through Pat Shurmur. We all lived through Joe Judge. I understand that the bouquets were being thrown to Brian Daboll early on in his head coaching, coach of the year, everything that we saw year number one, Giants going to the playoffs. But let's be honest here. The idea that Shane and Daboll this year, their jobs are on the line is complete and utter nonsense. Now, things could change, right? If the Giants go out there and win one game this year, if they win 2 games this year, if they win 3 games this year, obviously, things can change. It's all a very, very fluid situation. But I'll tell you this, sitting here on this Friday morning, late August, before the start of Labor Day weekend, Daboll's not going anywhere. The one thing I do know, as somebody, as I was informed, John Mara craves stability within the organization. And this has been an unstable franchise. And all the negativity, you could say, well, it's well-deserved because the Giants, the results on the field have led you to believe and led you to lean negative. That's why 2 years ago was so stunning and so surprising, because you went from the inept Joe Judge and his coaching staff with this team running the veer against the Washington team, at the end of the season, to then all of a sudden a guy in Brian Daboll that had an understanding of how to properly coach a team and put his team in a position to go out there and be successful. And everyone's like, wow, this is amazing. This is great. Finally, our head coach is not completely and utterly inept. Finally, I don't have to listen to a disastrous presser out in Chicago after a game against the Bears. But Mara does not enter this season, with some sort of playoff edict. It's got to look better for the Giants this year. Now, are the expectations for the Giants and the Jets completely different? For sure. And I think that's being realistic. If I came on the airwaves this morning and told you I think the Giants go in the NFC East, you'd ask me what I was smoking this morning. That's it. The Giants are not going to go out there. The Giants are not the Eagles. They're not even the Dallas Cowboys. I think they'll be better than the Washington Commanders, but we'll see with their new coaching staff and Dan Quinn and, Jane Daniels at quarterback. I think they'll be better than them, but we'll see. There's a lot of factors that come into play. But has everyone dissected what the Giants did during the course of the offseason based on watching Hard Knocks offseason with the New York Giants on HBO and all that? And we saw that the Giants and people trying to read body language and read what was going on in Joe Shane's office and Brian Daboll and everything like that. And the fact that they tried to move up to get a quarterback, everything that we knew before, but you saw it play out in video. And sometimes you got to feel it. You got to see it. You got to touch it in order to realize what was going on. Yes, the Giants were sitting there with the 6th overall pick, and they saw an opportunity, Shane and Daboll did, to go out there and potentially get their quarterback. They did not compound the problem by going out and drafting a quarterback for the sake of drafting one, because they already had one under contract in Daniel Jones that they had signed the previous offseason. But there is no general manager in the National Football League that is going to go out there as Joe Schoen was asked the question by Dan Duggan from The Athletic the other day. No general manager out there that's going to tell you, well, this is what it's got to be this season in order for it to be successful. Nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to pigeonhole themselves. Now, Schoen showed himself to, showed a little anger, showed a little frustration. And I get that. I understand that. You want to say that he can't lose his cool in that spot? That's fair. That's fair. But you know what? These guys are there to try and win football games. That's why Joe Schoen got the job with the New York Giants. Daboll's there to go out there and win football games. That's why he got the job with the New York Giants, to have this team be well-coached, well-prepared. And we all knew, and I do think this, the year one success changed the narrative with the Giants to all of a sudden put expectations on a team that were probably undeserved. But that's what good coaching does in the National Football League. And then all of a sudden the schedule is a lot more difficult. All of a sudden injuries hit them. The lack of depth when it comes to a roster perspective, because the roster was dying and rotting away on the vine under Dave Gettleman. All of a sudden that came home to roost a year ago, and the Giants had a disastrous season. What would lead you to believe that all of a sudden now, going into year 3, when you have a co-owner in John Mara that is craving stability, that the Giants now all of a sudden are going to be inept once again? Did Daboll forget how to coach? Are you going to point to Wink Martindale? Wink Martindale, who was basically sent away by John Harbaugh and the Baltimore Ravens. There is a timeline to Wink Martindale and his personality. Sent away here by the New York Giants. The Giants in the offseason cleaned up their coaching staff. Now, am I going to tell you that Shane Bowen's as good of a defensive coordinator as Wink Martindale? No, the results would lead you to believe that Wink isn't. But sometimes you have to have everybody pushing in the same direction when it comes to a franchise. We is greater than me. We is greater than me. You didn't hear any issues about Dave's after year number 1. No. He was out there smoking cigars, enjoying the victories with the fans afterward, all the videos that we saw. And Dave's was a coaching legend here in New York because you know what? He wasn't inept. He was not Joe Judge, and the Giants were playing competitive, winning football, and they went to the playoffs and beat the Minnesota Vikings out in Minnesota before they got absolutely lambasted by a more talented team than the Philadelphia Eagles. Last year was bad. I'm not going to deny it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this year needs to be bad. Are the Giants going to go to the playoffs in 2024? No. I'm not going to come on the airwaves this morning and tell you that. I'm not going to give you some screaming hot take and tell you. Now, can the Giants go out there, win 7 games, 8 games, 9 games this year? Absolutely. Could it look a lot better than it did a year ago? No question about it. Could this year be a building block year to sustain success in the National Football League? Every team in the National Football League craves that, no doubt. Do a lot of things need to go right? Unquestionably. But do I like the way that Shane is going about building this team? This offseason was a step in the right direction. You win at the point of attack. We can all go back to 2007 and all go back to 2011 and look at those Giant teams. And we could talk about Eli Manning and the great helmet catch by David Tyree out there in Glendale, Arizona. We could talk about the great throw from Eli to Mario Manningham out in Indianapolis. We could talk about, all of those things. Well, all of that does not happen. All of that does not happen. I know the Tyree play, Manning escaped the sack. I get it. But you know the point. The point being is this. The Giants, growing up, as a young pup in this area, right? Growing up, going to the old Giant Stadium, watching, the legends, watching Sims at quarterback and Joe Morris, watching, Bart Oates at center, watching Lawrence Taylor, Carl Banks, the great Leonard Marshall up front, Harry Carson, Pepper Johnson, Gary Reasons. The Giants won football games at that point. And I know the NFL has evolved, but still, in terms of a passing league. But the Giants won games at that point, and it still rings true then, and it still rings true now. You win at the point of attack. You win with your offensive line, and you win with your defensive line. The Giants did in 2007. The Giants did in 2011. Justin Tuck, who I heard getting interviewed, I think with the afternoon show with Evan and Tiki out at the Fanatics Fest, right? Justin Tuck, and I've interviewed him myself. Justin Tuck was the best player on the field that day in 2007 out in Glendale, Arizona. That defensive line was the reason the Giants had an opportunity to win that game late against New England. And this offseason, what did Shane do? We've heard Reese talk about it. We've heard Gettleman talk about it. He addressed the offensive line. Maybe not with the 6th overall pick, because you know what? They had an opportunity to draft an elite playmaker. But in free agency, he did. They've got an elite left tackle in Andrew Thomas. John Michael Schmitz, as long as he's healthy, I think he's going to be a starter at center for a long time. The offensive line for the Giants, you hope, is no longer the same talking point that it has been for the last decade plus. And when you think about the great Giant teams of years gone by, what do they also have the opportunity or the ability to go out there and do week in and week out, impose their will as a defense? Now, we can look at it as they're working out of Dory Jackson as we speak, out of the Giants training complex out there in East Rutherford, right? And they've got weakness and concern in the back end when it comes to that secondary. And they're looking for that number 2 cornerback outside of Banks, their starter, the former first-round draft choice. But the Giants this offseason, to go along with the drafting of Kayvon Thibodeau a couple years ago, the development of Dexter Lawrence, well, they went out there and added Brian Burns. Protect yours, get after theirs. Daboll didn't all of a sudden forget how to coach. Shane, who worked his rear end off in the National Football League to get an opportunity to be the general manager of the Giants, all of a sudden isn't completely inept and lost. You think John Mara wants to go out there and bring about wholesale change once again? That's the last thing you want to do in the National Football League. You want to try and stay the course unless it becomes abundantly clear, like it did with Judge, like it did with Gettleman, like it did with the end with Jerry Reese. Unless it becomes abundantly clear that you need to move on, that is not in the cards as we speak and sit here on this Friday morning, with the New York Giants. They might not have Super Bowl aspirations. You might not get the general manager, Joe Shane, to tell you, well, a successful year is 9 wins or 10 wins, and he's not going to go out there and pigeonhole himself to what a successful year looks like in 2024. But I'll tell you this, all the negativity, the Giants are going to be better. Just like there was no expectations year 1, there was over-the-top expectations in year 2. Now in year 3, all of a sudden, the expectation is that this team is going to be a dumpster fire. I'll tell you this, they're going to be better than that. What does a successful season look like? The general manager wouldn't answer it. I'll tell you this. What is successful, and John Mara has been clear as day with this since he's been a co-owner of the team. If the Giants are playing relevant football late in the season, it's a successful year. If they are playing meaningful games last quarter of the NFL regular season, if they have something to play for, you know what? It's a successful year. Can the Giants, if everything goes right, offensive line stays healthy, defense gets after the quarterback, defensive line imposes their will, playmakers at the wide receiver spot, and Daniel Jones plays well. I know that's a big key. If Daniel Jones plays well, can the Giants have a successful season? I think they can.